The late 1990s were a fiercely competitive time in the handheld gaming market. Nintendo dominated the scene with the Game Boy, but challengers were always emerging, each offering their own unique innovations to capture players' attention. In 1999, Bandai entered the fray with the WonderSwan, a handheld console designed to stand out in a crowded market. Created by Gunpei Yokoi, the legendary mind behind the Game Boy itself, the WonderSwan brought bold ideas to handheld gaming. With its sleek design, low power consumption, and unique dual orientation gameplay, the WonderSwan offered an experience unlike anything else on the market. Though it never reached the heights of its rivals, it earned a loyal following, especially in Japan, and boasted an impressive library of titles, including contributions from beloved franchises like Final Fantasy and Digimon. Today, we're diving into the story of the Bandai WonderSwan, exploring its innovative design, its successes, its struggles, and its place in the history of handheld gaming. So power up your monochrome screen and join us for today's trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 236th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby video games a reality. While telling you each week's story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we are learning about the Bandai WonderSwan, an innovative handheld console launched in 1999. Designed by the legendary Gunpei Yokoi, it brought unique features and an eclectic library of games to the market, challenging the Game Boy's dominance in Japan. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who'd probably still struggle to figure out how to hold it in both orientations. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, with your limited knowledge, what do you think is harder? Finding a WonderSwan game in English or explaining to someone what it even is?
I would have to go with the latter because I don't know what the first means.
Well, it's a Japanese-only console, so...
Well, there you go. So it's going to be tough for me to explain it because I don't know anything about it.
But there are games that had English that had English compatibility. There are games that existed that had that in a library. So
there's that's fine and dandy, but still don't know nothing about it.
Still don't know anything about the WonderSwan. Well, that's okay, because today we're going to learn all about Bandai, which we've never covered before. We will revisit a little bit of the career of Gunpei Yokoi, and that will topple us into wrapping up today by talking all about the WonderSwan. So before I jump into all of that, why don't you share with our listeners what else happened during the current week in gaming history?
Kicking it off on March 7th, 1991, Capcom released Street Fighter II for arcades, revolutionizing the fighting game genre. This sequel to the original Starfighter introduced a roster of distinct characters, each with unique fighting styles and special moves, setting the standard for future fighting games. Street Fighter II became a global phenomenon, known for its deep gameplay, competitive multiplayer, and iconic characters like Ryu, Chun-Li, and Ken. The game's success sparked a boom in the arcade industry and led to numerous updates, sequels, and home console ports, establishing Street Fighter II as one of the most influential and enduring titles in video game history.
We never covered the second one yet. It is got to go on a list.
I thought we did. Maybe
we covered the first one.
Okay, I thought it was the second, but maybe you're right.
Definitely haven't covered the second one.
Well, speaking of things we haven't covered, next up on March 6, 1997, Magic the Gathering made its debut in digital form. What?
Not true. We did cover Magic the Gathering.
Ah, shit.
We did a whole episode on it.
That was a bad segue.
That's okay. I'll give it.
Because I know we did do it, but I was thinking the opposite.
Yeah, it's all good. Okay, so tell us about Magic the Gathering going digital.
Alternatively, for things we have covered, on March 7th, 1997, Magic the Gathering made its debut in digital form with Magic the Gathering for PC, bringing the iconic card game to life in a new medium. Developed by Microprose, this adaptation featured a single player campaign called Chandelar, where players explored a fantasy world, battling opponents, and collecting cards to build their decks. The game faithfully replicated the mechanics of the original tabletop experience, allowing players to strategize and immerse themselves in the lore of Magic. While its interface and AI were primitive by today's standards, it is a landmark title that paved the way for the evolution of digital card games. We talked about the origins of this and its digital versions back in episode 137. So if you want to go learn more, go do that.
We sure did. Learned all about the history of Magic and its digital versions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next up, on March 4th, 2000, Sony launched the PlayStation 2 in Japan, setting the stage for one of the most successful consoles in gaming history. The PS2 featured groundbreaking hardware for its time, including the Emotion Engine CPU and DVD playback capability, which helped it double as a home entertainment system and broadened its appeal beyond gaming. Its massive library of games spanned all genres, from classics like Final Fantasy X and Metal Gear Solid 2 to groundbreaking series like Grand Theft Auto and Kingdom Hearts. The console introduced the DualShock 2 controller and backward compatibility with original PlayStation titles, adding to its allure. Selling over 155 million units worldwide, the PS2 remains the best selling console of all time, solidifying Sony's dominance in the gaming industry.
PlayStation 2 was a good that was a good
Good addition.
generation. Yes, good addition. It was a good generation. I was looking for the word generation because I enjoyed all the systems in that generation.
Well, speaking of good things, Dave, on March 5th, 2001, Conker's Bad Fur Day was released for the Nintendo 64, introducing players to a uniquely raunchy and comedic take on platforming. Developed by Rare, the game starred Conker, a foul-mouthed, beer-loving squirrel, navigating absurd scenarios in a world filled with adult humor, pop culture references, and surprising narrative depth. While the gameplay featured polished platforming, puzzles, and combat, it was the irreverent tone and daring satire that set Conker's Bad Fur Day apart from other titles of its era. Though initially overlooked due to its late release on the N64, the game became a cult classic, celebrated for pushing boundaries and showcasing Rare's versatility as a developer. We covered it back in episode 184, so give it a listen if you'd like to learn more.
We did that episode with. Did we do it with someone? I think we did it with Eric.
You would remember that better than I, Dave. I just remember the Great Mighty Pooh.
The Great Mighty Pooh, the Great Mighty Pooh opera. Conker's Bad Fur Day is.
Fantastic.
I still think it's an awesome title. So.
Speaking of awesome titles, on March 3rd, 2017, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild debuted, revolutionizing the open world genre and redefining what a Zelda game could be. Developed and published by Nintendo, the game launched alongside the Nintendo Switch, showcasing the system's capabilities while also releasing for the Wii U. Breath of the Wild introduced a vast, immersive world where players could explore at their own pace, tackle puzzles, and engage in combat with unparalleled freedom. Its innovative physics-based mechanics, stamina system, and non-linear progression allowed for countless solutions to challenges, encouraging creativity and experimentation. Critically acclaimed for its stunning art style, atmospheric soundtrack, and groundbreaking gameplay, Breath of the Wild quickly became a cultural phenomenon and is widely regarded as one of the greatest video games of all time.
Can you believe it's been 8 years?
It's pretty crazy to think, but 8 years since the Switch, and still going strong, baby. Switch Plus, though.
Switch 2.
Or 2, that's right. It's 2.
Switch 2. The Breath of the Wild was my lockdown game. That's what I finally got around to playing and finishing when we were trapped.
Nice. That's not a bad one to have done.
Now, Haru Yamashina, like so many other men who believed in the cause, enlisted to fight for his country, Japan, in World War II. But he soon found himself back home when an impact from grenade shrapnel blinded him in his right eye. So in 1947, he found himself working for a textile wholesaler owned by his wife's brother. which was struggling financially in Japan's post-war economy. Now, they were barely making ends meet, and no matter how hard they tried, they just couldn't figure out a way to make it work. They couldn't wrap their head around how to make the business pick up. And so, one fortuitous day, he was talking to his neighbor, and his neighbor told him about the potential of the toy industry and convinced him that there was much success that could be had from it. And Yamashina managed to take this conversation he had with his neighbor and he flipped it over to his employer. Basically going to his employer and saying, hey, I think that we can make some money doing toys because right now textiles ain't it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And somehow he convinced his employer to allow him and his wife to move to Tokyo in 1947 in order to sell toys on behalf of the textile company. Together, he and his wife worked long hours trying to establish a toy division in the midst of the textile market they were already a part of. They found some success, and in 1950, the toy division was actually spun off into its own company named Bandai, which is part of a Chinese phrase that basically translates to things that are eternal. That same year in 1950, Bandai produced its first truly original toy. It was a beach ball with a little bell inside, which was called the Rhythm Bell. And it was notoriously made poorly. It had quality problems left and right. But the company learned from its mistakes and quality improved. And what it learned from that, it took that experience and it moved into manufacturing other toys. During this time period, that included celluloid dolls, metal cars, aircraft models, and rubber swimming rings.
Oh,
That was so
okay.
outlandish, I liked it. Their line of inexpensive metal cars and aircraft were so popular that they were eventually exported to the United States, being one of the earliest products that were ever stamped with the Made in Japan label across the globe. And although they were now a global company, Bandai was considerably more successful as a Japanese company rather than a global one, until roughly about 1963, when it began producing action figures based on the anime Astro Boy. Now, the company found a lot of success with the Astro Boy line, and this success of that specific toy line led them to rethink their business strategy. By this time, they were now just simply known as Bandai. That change occurred in 1960. So moving forward, Bandai decided that they were going to fund the creation of television series, act as its sponsor during its run, and then tie in merchandise, action figures, costumes, so on and so forth, to said television series. Now, these weren't their television series per se. They did eventually get to making original stuff, but in the beginning, they sponsored the creation of TV shows for series that you may know. Series like Ultraman, Mobile Suit Gundam was another one. Definitely not Bandai Creations, but they were the money behind the animes, and they were the merchandise company. They made a lot of money doing that. And like many other Japanese toy manufacturers that we've learned about on this podcast, Bandai eventually joined the video game market. In 1982, they released the LCD Solar Power series. They were a handful of solar powered handheld gaming devices that featured games that were very, very similar to the Game & Watch series that was popularized by Nintendo, which is kind of cool. You know, we had solar powered calculators and they had solar powered handheld video games.
Yeah, what the heck? We got cheated there.
We did get cheated there. That same year, 1982, they licensed an Atari 2600 competitor made by Emerson Radio that was known as the Arcadia 2001. and they released it in Japan as the Bandai Arcadia. You ever heard of the Arcadia?
No, can't say that I have, Dave.
Yeah,
Have you?
that tells you how popular it is.
Mm.
They became one of the first third-party developers for the Nintendo Family Computer, the Famicom, in 1985. You probably know one of their earliest successes if you know anything about Nintendo. Uh, their earliest success was the Family Trainer Pad, which was bought by Nintendo and then licensed out as the Power Pad for the Nintendo Entertainment System here in the US. You know, that little pad with the red and blue dots that people run on.
Oh, yep.
We that was bought in our house, bought for mom, and we had the track meet games,
Yep.
track and field.
Sure enough, we did.
It wasn't track and field. What was it called? Athletic events? Stadium events? No,
I
stadium
thought it was
events is
track and
the
field.
original. Anyway, the Power Pad, created by Bandai. And throughout the Nintendo and Super Nintendo generations, the success of Bandai grew as they helped developers publish video games for licensed properties. Their name is on video game properties for Dragon Ball, Dick Tracy, Gundam, the Rocketeer tie-in video game, Sailor Moon was in there, and the Toxic Crusaders. So a whole bunch of TV shows and movies they brought over to video games. Bandai was very, very much part of the growth that happened as the video game industry rebounded after the video game crash in 1983, right? And of course, we know that one of the figures that was instrumental in that growth was working at one of Bandai's competitors. Now, we've done multiple episodes on Gunpei Yokoi. Our most recent one was last summer when we covered the creation of his Game & Watch series. That was one of the first successful handheld gaming platforms across the world. But as always, part of a story. So if you want to learn it in depth, go back and check out the episodes, but we'll revisit it briefly. I don't know why I can't say revisit, but there we go. So in 1965, after graduating with a degree in electronics, Yokoi was hired by Nintendo to maintain one of his assembly lines. He was a maintenance man for one of their what are called Hanafuda playing card assembly lines. If you don't know, Nintendo, before they were a video game company, they were originally a playing card company. They made these playing cards in Japan, which are called Hanafuda. And so, again, Yokoi was hired to be the maintenance man, to keep the assembly line running. But in his spare time, when the assembly line was running smoothly, I guess you could say, Yokoi invented toys for his own amusement. And one day, the president of Nintendo was touring the factory when he noticed one of Yokoi's toys, and he asked him to develop it as a proper product to sell for the Christmas rush. And that first toy was called the Ultra Hand. It looks like one of those extenders, like the hand with the handle on it, so you can pick things up without bending over.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the Ultra Hand is. That was the first one.
Gotcha.
And that began a long storied career that Yokoi moved over into developing toys for Nintendo, and then he helped Nintendo transition from a playing card company essentially to a toy company. They started selling a larger variety of toys, many of which were designed by Yokoi himself. In the mid 70s, the company decided to make video games, and Yokoi became one of its first video game designers. Actually, he was its second, as the history goes. The Game & Watch line was one of his largest successes during this early chapter in his career. Those are the mixture of that's essentially what they sound like. They're little LCD watches that play video games.
Neat.
Ish, not really LCD watches. They're
Okay, fair enough.
You know what a Game & Watch is. It's a little handheld video game. They were made
Never seen it there. Nope, never heard of it.
And during the rest of his career at Nintendo, he oversaw some of the most iconic games and devices to come out of Nintendo's doors, right? As a producer, he supervised Shigeru Miyamoto as he created Donkey Kong and the first Mario Brothers game. He would also be a producer on the teams that created Kid Icarus, Metroid, and he is considered the creator of the Game Boy, one of the most successful handheld platforms of all time. His record of success after success after success would unfortunately come to an end with his creation of the Virtual Boy in 1995.
True that.
Yeah, one of Nintendo's great failures. Now, if you'd like to learn more about Yokoi, the Virtual Boy, and its downfall, we did a whole episode on it. We told that story in episode 99. But for the purpose of today's story, really all you need to gravitate to is that it's one of Nintendo's most well known failures. Now, what happens next is just a matter of who you ask. Some people will tell you that Nintendo blamed the machine's faults directly on Yokoi and pressured him to, retire. Others will tell you that he had planned to retire years earlier, but he delayed it until the Virtual Boy helped him realize that it was probably time for him to move on. And just like that, Gunpei Yokoi's legendary career at Nintendo came to an end. Whether he left at his own terms or was quietly pushed out after the Virtual Boy's failure, his impact on the company and gaming itself was undeniable. But Rob, not every transition has to be quite so dramatic.
Oh? What are you getting at, Dave?
I'm talking about how starting your own podcast doesn't have to be a struggle. If you've got a passion for gaming history or anything else, our friends at Zedcaster have made it easier than ever to share your voice with the world.
That's right. Zencaster's all-in-one platform lets you record in crystal clear 4K video and professional quality audio, all from your web browser. No complicated setups required.
And their post-production tools take care of the hard work, automatically removing background noise, balancing audio, and even cutting out those awkward pauses or filler words.
Plus, when you're ready to share your podcast, Zencaster makes it simple to distribute your episodes to all the major platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
So if you've been thinking about starting a podcast, there's no better time to do so. Head over to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane, and you can get 30% off your first month of any paid Zencaster plan.
Sounds a lot easier than launching a brand new console, that's for sure.
No kidding. So listeners, don't wait. Start your podcasting journey with Zencaster today. Just go to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane, and you can get 30% off any monthly plan.
All right, Dave. So, we're not here to talk about Bandai or Gunpei Yokoi, so there's got to be more to the story, right?
That is absolutely right. So after Yokoi retired, so to speak, from Nintendo, he decided to create his own company called Koto Laboratory. And Koto's main goal was to make the whole world entertaining. Not terribly long afterwards, Bandai approached Koto Laboratory looking to create a handheld system that could compete with the incredible success that Yokoi's own Game Boy was seeing. Right? They want to
Right?
make money too. It's understandable.
Yeah.
And so began the development of what became the Bandai WonderSwan. Bandai WonderSwan, so named to highlight its aesthetics and technical capabilities in order to draw comparison to its namesake, which the swan is an elegant bird with powerful legs that aids its graceful swimming. Now, longtime listeners will be familiar with Yokoi's design philosophy, but for those of you who aren't, allow me to introduce you to lateral thinking with withered technology. Instead of designing things using the latest and greatest, and thus most expensive technologies, Yokoi believed in utilizing mature technologies that are cheap and well understood, aka withered technology, and using said withered technology in new and exciting ways, hence lateral thinking.
Ah.
And we see this time and time again in his design philosophy, right? His early one, the laser clay system, was an early one, and it used red LCDs like the lasers. The Game Boy, they were on the cusp of color at the moment, color screens, and they decided to go with a very basic monochrome LCD screen because it was cheaper, right? They could undercut everyone. And they wanted to leverage other things to make the handheld exciting, right? Game and Watch. LCD watches were a thing, and he thought, hey, if I can use the same technology in LCD watches to make a little handheld gaming device, we have an inexpensive, reliable handheld gaming device. Time and time again, Yokoi has taken, these well established technologies, and he has put them together to create something new. And by and large, as a side note, that is Nintendo's whole design philosophy, is it not?
It definitely is.
I mean, that did not change when Yokoi stopped designing for them. They continue to this day to do that.
Yeah.
The Wii started was that. The Switch was another one, right? These are all, there's nothing cutting edge about the Switch. They put it in a nice shiny package that really worked incredibly well.
Uh-huh. That they did.
Nintendo's whole design philosophy is lateral thinking with weird technology, but that definitely came from Gunpei Yokoi, as one of their earliest designers across the board, toys and then video games. It's no surprise that they've kind of stuck with the design philosophy that has brought them so much success throughout the years, right? With all that in mind, all those technologies that Yokoi has kind of, you know, brought new innovative uses for, it should come as no surprise that when he came to Bandai to help them design a new handheld, that his design philosophy did not suddenly change. We see this same concept in the early design philosophy of today's topic, the Bandai WonderSwan. The WonderSwan is, like the Game Boy, a handheld with a monochrome screen that was released 8 years after the Game Boy. Game Boy was 1991. We're talking 1999 is the WonderSwan. And the Game Boy popularized handhelds with monochrome screens. But at this time, there were a lot of competitors. Neo Geo had a Pocket that came out in 1998. The Atari Lynx, the Sega Game Gear. These were all color handhelds. So they were trying to release a monochrome handheld in a market that was moving forward with color screens. Let me just point that out.
Yeah,
But
that's a
after
pretty rough decision.
but after watching the Game Boy absolutely crush the competition with its improved battery life and superior game library, Yokoi and Bandai basically hoped to see the WonderSwan succeed in a similar fashion. Now, it was not the Game Boy 2.0. Let me point that out. We had moved on to the 16-bit era, so it was a 16-bit processor, definitely more under the hood. And what was unique about it is that it was designed in such a way that it could be played either vertically or horizontally. So your games didn't just have one orientation, which meant that game developers had more choice in how to present their games. When the WonderSwan was released, or announced rather, the company promised a 30-hour battery life on a single AA battery, a low retail price, and a launch lineup of roughly 50 games. Not bad.
No, not at all. But
Over delivered on a 30-hour promise, actually.
oh,
The
sure.
original, wasn't that impressive?
Yeah, by how much?
The original WonderSwan got 40 hours on a single AA battery.
Oh, a single. Holy shit.
Yeah, just one. The whole line only takes one AA battery. Its retail price was significantly lower than some of the other handhelds available on the market at the time. That last part, though, the 50 game library, well, they kind of came up short there. When it was finally launched on March 4th, 1999, it only had 7 games available.
Oh, well, that's not quite what you said there.
uh, I counted. They didn't have a library of 50 games until October of 1999.
Damn.
Those initial 7 games were pretty much, I think 5 of them were actually published by Bandai themselves. They partnered with their companies that were longtime partners and got them to develop for the WonderSwan. What success the WonderSwan did have down the line was thanks to the support that Bandai received from other developers, however. Well-known developers eventually signed up on the WonderSwan as the monochrome WonderSwan became the WonderSwan Color the following year, so that monochrome screen didn't last very long. We got the WonderSwan Color in 2000, had a color screen, obviously to play color games. It was still backwards compatible with the monochrome WonderSwan games, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even with a color screen, you could play for 20 hours on a single AA battery.
That's still crazy.
Isn't that like when did we stop getting so efficient with things?
When they required a lot more power to process.
Yeah, no, I was thinking the same thing. Eventually, the WonderSwan Color would give way to an even more updated version called the WonderSwan Crystal. Had an even slicker look and an updated LCD screen. So, they did upgrade the line a few times. True to form, the WonderSwan Crystal also ripped a single AA battery, but now it only got 20 hours. It went 40, 30, 20. I think I said it wrong in the middle. They each lost 10 hours each time. So originally got 40, WonderSwan Color got 30, WonderSwan Crystal got 20 hours out of it. So
That's still insane considering it was a single AA.
I know, I know. Not even the original Game Boy was a single AA.
No, it was two.
It was 2, yeah.
That's what makes it all the more impressive to me is that it's that lifetime on a single battery.
Well, to be fair, I think 8 hours. 8 hours. I
8
think
years
eight.
of tech.
Yeah, 8 years of tech probably made that possible. So as the handheld market transitioned into color and Bandai grew in popularity, they were able to bring more of their licensed franchises over to the handheld. The WonderSwan Color specifically enjoyed games using licenses from Dragon Ball, Digimon, Inuyasha, Guilty Gear, Naruto, One Piece, Gundam, and Ultraman. A lot of really well-known media franchises ended
Yep,
up on
that good
that.
old Naruto.
Good old Naruto.
Jesus.
It's everywhere.
Almost impossible for me to even say it that way.
How is it said?
Naruto?
Naruto?
Naruto.
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 Whatever. It was a coup when Squaresoft decided to fracture its relationship with Nintendo. If you'll recall, we talked all about this in our Final Fantasy VII episode. They broke it off with Nintendo when they decided to publish Final Fantasy VII as a PlayStation exclusive. And when that happened, its handheld titles had to go somewhere, right? Because they weren't going to put them on the Game Boy anymore.
Right.
And so the WonderSwan library benefited from the addition of Squaresoft games. It has Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 4, as well as a handful of other Squaresoft games like Romancing Saga. There are, a lot of great games in this library. Konami even brought a version of Beat Media over to the WonderSwan.
Oh, wow.
They did that on the monochrome. It's actually a monochrome WonderSwan game, actually.
Wow.
It's probably weird as heck.
Yeah.
So, needless to say, Bandai got support from other developers, All in all, there were 109 games in the WonderSwan library and 91 games that are specific to the WonderSwan color. So, it had a pretty robust library. Nothing to shy at whatsoever. It had an armored unit game even. They brought Crazy Climber over to that, which was a popular, I think we know it more as Rampage over here, is what it turned into. Load Runner came over to it. Puzzle Bobble came over to it. Gundam, 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 Gundam. So a lot of really great games came over to the WonderSwan. Let's see on the color side what we get. We get anything fun? Digimon Front Mission, Golden Axe, Mr. Driller. That's a fun one. Rockman. So it got two Mega Man titles. Tetris and Wizardry. The first Wizardry came
Oh
over to the
wow,
WonderSwan too.
that's surprising.
So it it had support. I mean, it had support, you know. And also for the WonderSwan library, there are a number of really interesting accessories that came out for it. It's one of the rare major consoles, so to speak, at the time. I know that's different now. But they actually released an official software development kit for the system. Now, it was 3 times the cost of the original WonderSwan, only slightly more expensive than the Crystal, but that was still affordable to a hobbyist, and it allowed amateur programmers to create games for the WonderSwan in the C programming language. I don't know of any other system in that time period that let hobbyists program for it realistically.
Yeah, I don't know.
Bandai sold a remote control robot called the Wonderborg that could be operated with the WonderSwan as its remote. It had this infrared pocket wave adapter that could actually attach to. So the Sony PlayStation had this really cool memory card device that it had a little LCD screen on it, and there were some games that you could like load your save into it and then do like a little mini game in the memory card. I think there were not maybe Digimon, Monster Hunter. It wasn't Pokemon, but it was one of the other games that's like Pokemon that you could like level up your characters on this little memory card type thing, right?
I
And
mean,
they
I
actually had
remember that at some point, but that was later on.
yeah, you probably are thinking of the ACU for the Dreamcast.
No, no, no. I'm saying like Pokemon had the little Pokeball release, like the little Pokeball thing
Oh,
that you could
yeah,
literally
yeah,
transfer
yeah.
a Pokemon to.
Yeah, well, there was
Um,
an accessory like that for the PlayStation,
I
and
know that.
they actually made an accessory for the WonderSwan that let you connect to it, upload saves to it, and do little play little additions on the little screen. So it also had an online adapter that was called the Wonder Gate that would let you connect your WonderSwan to a modular network, a mobile network rather, and that would allow you to download additional content for your games, which is crazy in 1999 2000 to think about a gaming device that could connect to a mobile network. Although the original console itself was definitely withered technology, I would argue that there were certainly attempts to modernize it through newer versions and some interesting accessories, right? Now, sad to say, Gunpei Yokoi never got to see the release of the WonderSwan. We've talked about this before, but let's cover it for all the newbies out there. Early on in Handheld's development, he sadly passed away in a pretty horrible automobile accident. As the story goes, he was driving with someone else and they rear-ended another vehicle. And when the gentleman got out to observe the damage, another vehicle came and hit Yokoi, and he passed away from his injuries. And what the WonderSwan is the last remnant of his long and storied legacy. The original WonderSwan sold decently. And although the sales strategy was in the right place with the cheap price, it was really still a hard ask 8 years or so into the success of the Game Boy, which is the system it mostly gets compared to. Transitioning it over to color was perhaps one of the smartest things they could have done, but unfortunately, it was too little too late because somewhere between the announcement of, but before the release of, the WonderSwan Color, Nintendo announced the Game Boy Advance, which was superior in every which way.
That's rough.
It was more expensive, no doubt. The WonderSwan had its price point beat by 25% roughly. It was a significant price difference, but that didn't matter. Once people got their hands on the GBA, there was just no stopping it. You know, the WonderSwan Crystal was, I mean, it was another attempt to try to make inroads against Nintendo. But let's be honest, that was just Nintendo's is a behemoth in the video game industry, and it didn't stick. It didn't stick. So between all three versions, the WonderSwan platform sold 3.5 million units before the platform was discontinued in 2003. So it only lasted 4 years. And just to put that into perspective of what they were up against, the Game Boy Advance was around a lot longer until 2010, but it sold 81.5 million units.
Oh, geez. Hardly a comparison.
Yeah, for sure. You only last till 2010 because you have a reason to stick around all that time. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I would like to add somewhere in the middle of that, in 2000, Bandai actually signed an agreement with Mattel to have Mattel bring the WonderSwan over to the United States, but for whatever reason, that never happened. I mean, who knows? We can do the what ifs until we're blue in the face, but maybe it would have been slightly more successful if they had chosen to follow through on an international release, because then you would have had Western developers and a much larger player base anywhere else, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I wouldn't say that, but if you came to North America, you'd have a larger base at least.
You'd have at least some more sales. Who knows how many it would be, but it would be
Yeah,
more.
but they didn't. For whatever reason they didn't. The Game Boy Advance had an international release, so it's hard to compare when one is specific to Japan and the other's not. As the percentage goes, they only captured 8% of the mobile of the I say mobile because it's mobile now, but 8% of the handheld market at the time, which was not nearly as much as they had hoped for.
Right.
Ultimately, the WonderSwan is really just a little detour in video game history, and honestly, its most important significance is that it's the footnote to Yokoi's career. It's the game that he was working on when his life was sadly cut short. As a result of his car accident. Now, there are some things that still persist. Kodo Laboratory. I don't know why I have to say laboratory, but Kodo Labs is still around, and now it manufactures some innovative toys. I was checking out their stuff. They've got some fun things. So his legacy lives on there, and his legacy is, I mean, we covered him time and time again. He's got a long storied history in video, long storied story in video game history, right? He's a very important figure in video game history, and this is just one piece of a much larger story. Um, they did, I will say, nice little point. They did create a game in his honor called Gunpei that first released on the WonderSwan. Obviously, it's named in his honor, right?
Right.
It's a puzzle game where you move fragments vertically in a line to make a single branching horizontal line. Think Tetris, but with lines and not so much blocks, is a easier way to visualize it. And so, yeah, they named it after Gunpei Yokoi, called it Gunpei, and it has a WonderSwan version, a original PlayStation version. They brought it to the Nintendo DS, and they brought it to the PlayStation Portable. So there have been some versions of it throughout the years that are still his namesake too. So there's also that. As for Bandai itself, the late '90s were not kind to the company at all. This was not its only commercial failure. This time, just before this time period that the story takes place, there's a famous story where Bandai wasn't doing so well. So they had a series of mishaps. They were also involved in the Apple Pippin, which we've talked about before, that flopped. So you've got the WonderSwan, the Pippin, all this other stuff going. All these just series of financial burdens, so to speak. But in the mid '90s, they were going to merge with Sega, actually. And the story goes that they worked on this merger for a long, long while, and it was supposed to go through in, like, I don't know, October, and in May, like months before the merger was supposed to go through, Bandai employees started to, like, really voice concerns about this merger, and basically they didn't like Like they had this really great work-life balance type thing going on, and Sega did was known for like this top-down style of culture that they were concerned would clash with their work culture. And so they voiced their opinions loud enough that at one point the board of directors at Bandai called off the merger,
Oh wow.
and the president of Bandai was forced to like publicly apologize for not doing enough to earn the agreement of the employees of his company to merge with Sega. So they called off the merger like months before it was supposed to happen. And then if you know the company now, their current name, Bandai Namco, you know that they merged with Namco in 2005. And I'm sure there's plenty of stories to tell in there that we'll get to someday, but today is not that day. We'll leave the story of Bandai and the WonderSwan at that and call it a day. But there are a lot of stories that touch on this. You know, we've actually talked about that work culture at Sega before in our episodes on Afterburner for starters. We also kind of touch on it in early stories like Crazy Taxi is a little bit about Sega. There are a couple Sega stories in there, and of course, if you want to learn more about that story in detail and anything related to that, you can do so by checking out our old episodes. Of course, you can get them anywhere you listen to your podcasts, like Spotify, Apple Podcasts. But of course, our notes and our old episodes are all found on our website, which is www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people find on our website?
You can find a calendar of our future episode topics. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can help support us and get access to ad-free and unedited versions of our podcast episodes. You can find a link to our Discord where you can come chat with Dave and I about episode topics or anything else that might be relevant at the moment. And you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is Wrong. Each week, ladies and gentlemen, we'll tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, a person, a console, technology. I've done it about a museum once. Just some topic that I like to find relevant to the publication week of, each episode. And while telling you each episode, each topic, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, of course, we talked all about Bandai and Gunpei Yokoi and his last project, the WonderSwan. One of the best things about getting to do this is when I sit down to research new topics. I was just doing a new one earlier today. I always learn new things. And when I learn new things, I get excited because I get to then share these new things with you. So it's this fantastic cycle of teaching and learning, learning and teaching. And in recognition and celebration of said cycle, we like to go around each week and talk about what we didn't know. And so, Rob, what did you learn today?
I learned that there was a console that could run on a single AA battery for a very long time, and that's pretty freaking awesome.
For a very long time. Yeah.
I again, we talk. It was 8 years after the Game Boy, which was the comparative to it, and of course, after 8 years, your power consumption is going to go down, so things are going to be more efficient. You can power it with less. Um, but just thinking on the handheld consoles of that time, even the Game Boy Advance, which albeit was more powerful, was still two double A's. It was always two double A's. That was the standard. And it's just crazy to me to think that there was a somewhat popular, I mean, 8.5 million is nothing to scoff at, a somewhat popular console. Sorry, 3.5 million. Um, 3.5 million is nothing to scoff at. And it ran on a single battery.
Yep.
And that's just, it blows my mind. Like, I get Game and Watch, but it's a little more involved than Game and Watch. But hey, just goes to show you, Yokoi and his companies, they knew what they were doing.
Very much so. I will
So
100% agree with that.
it's
Yep.
always great hearing his success stories, even if it wasn't the biggest success, still success. How many people can say they made a console that sold 3.5 million?
It's very true because the earlier Bandai consoles did not.
So exactly. So just fantastic. Great learning about this. Kind of would have been interesting to see if it got to the States, but it's like you said, we'll never know.
Nope.
So
Well,
what's
not.
your big takeaway from this week?
I have tripped on the WonderSwan a lot. I'm not. It's not like I've never heard of it. It's not like I've never even not brought it up before. We've talked about the WonderSwan before, but I've never really looked at it in detail. I've never obviously not familiar with it because it is Japanese and I'm not a collector. People that know stuff like this are collectors, right? Um, so this was new for me, and I think the thing I find most fascinating is I had no idea it was multi orientation. I had zero idea that it could be played upright or sides, on its side. I think that's cool. I think that's a neat novelty. I enjoy finding all the ways that Yokoi comes up, of his, weather technology philosophy. I enjoy the innovation and how they try to do things differently. So finding that out for me, and then subsequently doing research about what that looked like, um, which is part of the process for me that I don't ever really get to talk about here, is a lot of fun. It's a whole lot of fun because there are ways you can go and play WonderSwan games and kind of get to learn what that means. So
Absolutely.
I would encourage everyone to go check out libraries and do things like that for sure. It was fun. I like that. All right, Rob. Well, before I take it out of here and look ahead to next week's episode, is there anything you'd like to add to today's episode?
I'll just take a quick moment to say thank you to so much for everyone for listening. It means the world, and we hope you get to enjoy learning about some of these episode topics with us. So thank you.
Yes, sir. Well, that concludes our look at the Bandai WonderSwan, the little handheld that could, also couldn't. Though it may not have reached the heights of its competitors, its innovation and unique library have made it a worthwhile tale as we continue to visit the annals of video game history. The next time you pick up a little portable console, I want you to think back to this underdog and the what if of its David versus Goliath fight against Nintendo. Maybe it would have won. Who knows? Next week, though, we're trading the innovation of the WonderSwan for the chaos of Springfield as we step into the world of The Simpsons. Specifically, we'll look at the history of The Simpsons themselves, and then we'll look at video game depictions of The Simpsons in history, starting with The Simpsons arcade game that was released in 1991. That arcade title is a fan favorite beat 'em up that brought the hilarity of America's favorite animated family to arcades. It let players brawl their way through Springfield in search of stolen donuts. Or maybe it was Maggie. You and I played it, didn't we? We
Oh,
played the Simpsons arcade game. I made
yeah,
you
we
play
did.
that. We
Yeah,
sure
we
did.
did. I
All
can't
right.
remember the answer to your question.
Well, then you're going to be familiar with it. Either way, join us as we revisit this iconic game and learn why tossing bowling balls at goons is the true American pastime as we take next week's trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Skibidi ba 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 da da, skibidi ba 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 da ba.